Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Diptarup Ghosh Dastidar and I am an assistant professor in the Amity School of Languages, Amity University, Chhattisgarh. And this is the third session that we are having on Robert Browning and also the second session on My Last Duchess. So in the first session, we discussed the poet, Robert Browning. In the second session, we talked about the background to the poem and also about the structure, that is the dramatic monologue form and also the verse structure in which this poem was written. In this session, we are going to dive into the poem itself. And to understand what the poem entails, let us understand in how many parts it is divided. So the poem has in all 56 lines and it is divided into 4 parts. Let's see what these 4 parts are. So number 1 is lines number 1 to 21, and this is the introductory part which deals with the portrait itself. So what is the portrait about and how the portrait comes into play and what is how the poem begins in itself. After this, from line 21 to 34 is the description of the Duchess. So my last Duchess, that is Lucrezia. Lucrezia is described in these lines 21 to 34 and described in the sense what, according to the Duke, were the problems with Lucrezia. Next up, from line 34 to line 47, we have the idea that the Duke will not bow. So basically, the Duke presents himself as a character in these lines who will not bow down to or not stoop low in order to explain how to behave to the Duchess, right? And basically the Duke has a problem with the Duchess. We'll discuss about that. So 34 to 47, and then finally 47 to 56, we have the actual point which the Duke is driving towards. So when I say that the actual point in which the Duke is driving towards, it means that what is the point of this poem? Why has the Duke been speaking about his last Duchess? What is the point? And this we find in the last section. So this clearly is a 4-part structure that we find in the poem. These are the 4 parts of the poem, and today we are going to do the first part, because as you can see that the first part is almost half of the poem. After that we have the 3 parts, and hopefully in the next session we'll be doing the 3 parts together. In this session, however, we'll only do the introductory part and we'll try to finish it off. And how are we going to address this poem at this point? What we are going to do is that, unlike finding out repetitions or just the figures of speech that we did in the last poem, so the figures of speech, yes, we'll be having an eye out for that. But more importantly, because the dramatic monologue, according to Browning, as Browning presents it, is literally in the form of a drama, what we will do is try to understand this poem as it is, as a drama. We'll try to figure out how this poem has the dramatic moment in it, how it has the dramatic, force running all through it. So let's not waste any more time and get right into the poem. So the first part says, "That's my last Duchess painted on the wall. Looking as if she were alive, I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands." As you can pretty much see how, in the first 4 lines itself, we get one of the figures of speech that we already know, and that is enjambment. So I'll just erase this structure so that I can now talk about the rest of the poem. So in the first part we find enjambment. What is enjambment? Enjambment is also called as run-on lines, which means that sometimes what happens is that some lines they end, but the meaning has not really ended with those lines, and so after the line ends, the meaning gets transferred to the next line. As you can see, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall. So the Duke points towards a painting and says, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall. Then looking as if she were alive, we'll come to this. Looking as if she were alive. So she is not alive, we know this now. As if she were alive, or maybe she is alive somewhere else where we don't know that yet. But the painting is so lively, it seems like the last Duchess is alive in that painting. So that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call what? See, in the next line you find that piece a wonder now. See, that piece of wonder in itself does not make any sense, but when you read it, I call that piece a wonder, now it makes sense. So when we are going to read this poem, we are going to read it in this way so that we understand the sense rather than just the rhyming pattern A, A, B, B, C, C. We'll not read like normal poems, we'll read it like a drama. So that's my last Duchess painted on the wall. So he's showing it to someone, looking as if she were alive. As if she were almost alive, I call that piece a wonder. So the Duke has the authority, and we'll also notice how the Duke is extremely authoritative and he has a lot of possessiveness in him. So we'll see all of that. I call that piece a wonder. The idea of the I comes very hard when it comes to the Duke. So I call that piece a wonder now. So what does this now mean? The now could be two things, right? I call that piece a wonder now. So earlier that piece was not a wonder. Earlier that painting might be a reason for irritation, might be a frustrating thing for the Duke. Or maybe what led to that painting being made might be frustrating, and we'll know about that in the poem. But now that piece is a wonder, because now it's a beautiful lady who is almost alive as can be in a painting. There are some repercussions to this. Let's go step by step. So looking as if she were alive, I call that piece a wonder now. So one meaning of now would be now I call it a wonder. The other meaning could be that I call that piece a wonder. Now, from Pendol's hands, so he's bringing the discussion from one subject to another subject using the word now. We often do that. For instance, today we will be talking about this and this and this and this. Now, there are three things. So you see, I use the word now in order to bring your attention to something else. So it might be used in this way also. So I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands. So Fra Pandolf, Fra means brother. Fra means brother, and this is basically a clerical term. So in the church, the brother is called Fra. Or even, usually Fra would mean a brother, even if it is not clerical, right? So Fra Pandolf is a mythical, if not a mythical, but someone who has been made up, a fictional character. So Fra Pandolf's hands work busily a day. You see, Fra Pandolf did not work busily. His hands worked busily. So I could say this is a synecdoche, but then Fra Pandolf has been mentioned. So there is no fixity whether it is a synecdoche or not, because yes, the part for the whole, hand for the body, but Fra Pandolf has been mentioned also. So you can see it in both ways. Synecdoche or not synecdoche. So Fra Pandolf's hands work busily a day. Fra Pandolf has been diminished to hands. That's what happens. That's what even it happens with the Duchess. So the Duchess, the live living Duchess, has been reduced to a painting, and well, he is happy with the painting. He calls it a wonder now. He was not happy with the Duchess. So the Duchess, as she was not happy with the Duchess, and we'll see why in the poem. But now that the Duchess is a painting, he's happy because now the Duchess is under his control. Now he doesn't have to worry about things that the Duchess does or did, because now the Duchess is always in front of him, and whenever he wants to see, he can just go and see the Duchess. So Fra Pandolf's hands are very similar to that. Just like the Duchess is reduced to a painting, Fra Pandolf is reduced to his hands. So Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and see, there she stands. So again, this use of she here is very interesting because he does not consider the painting as a painting. He literally considers the painting as the person. So the painting is a person, and the person, well, in being a person, what is happening is that he is happy with it. He is considering the painting as a person whom he can control. So the idea of the idea of control, you'll find it a lot in the character of the Duke. Moving on, will it please you sit and look at her? Now this is the dramatic moment. This is the moment where we figure out that there is a listener, and he has asked his listener to do something, and his listener does that. Remember second rule of dramatic monologue? There is a listener or a group. There's a group of listeners, and they react to what is being spoken but do not respond. So how do we know that they are reacting? Through lines like these. So, will it please you sit and look at her? Could you please sit and look at her? I said. Now see, this will it please you sit and look at her, it sounds like a request, but in the mouth of the Duke, it is much more like an order. So whatever the Duke requests throughout the poem, it will subtly sound like an order, something that you have to follow. You cannot say no to the Duke, because what will happen if you say no to the Duke, we'll come to know. So, will it please you sit and look at her, I said, Fra Pandolf by design. See, I said Fra Pandolf, so enjambment. I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance. So I said Fra Pandolf by design means that by design, the word by design means intentionally. So he intentionally called on the name of Fra Pandolf because strangers like you, is pointing towards the stranger, whoever the stranger is, and he says that strangers like you, that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turn, since none's put by the curtain that I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask if they durst, how such a glance came there. So see, the way it has been written, it may seem a little bit complicated, but it's not really that complicated, because here the Duke is saying that, see, why did I say Fra Pandolf? Because see, I am looking into your eyes, my dear guest, and I have seen these eyes earlier. There have been so many people, you're not the first. There have been so many people. The moment I showed them this painting, and then he focuses on how, within a parenthesis, I'll come to parenthesis, within a parenthesis he says how I am the only one who can see this painting or who can show this painting to anyone else, because I hold the right to remove the curtain of this painting. So the painting is always covered with a curtain, and it is only the Duke who can uncover the curtain. And he says that whenever I have uncovered the curtain for someone, people have always asked me that, my God, such a beautiful dimple she has, such an amazing expression she has. What is it that brought that expression on her face? So this is a question that many people have in their minds when they look at the painting, according to the Duke. So the Duke thinks that the people have this question in their minds. It doesn't matter to him whether they actually want to ask it. And no one asks. He realizes, the Duke thinks that people have this question in their mind, but he thinks that people are also afraid to ask this question to him. And so he answers the question himself. Do you understand? The Duke is as if he's controlling the entire argument. He does not need a person to talk to. He's just talking to someone, responding, talking back, responding, asking questions, responding. So that is the nature of the Duke. And the dramatic monologue, the form, it fits perfectly with the character of the Duke of Ferrara. So he goes on and he asks that I said Fra Pandolf by design. So the answer to the question, how come there is such an amazing expression on the face, is in the name Fra Pandolf. So the answer is Fra Pandolf. Why is the Duchess happy? Fra Pandolf. Why is there such an amazing expression? Fra Pandolf. See, I'm muttering with Fra Pandolf. It's actually a lot like a tongue twister. So why is she so happy? Why does she has the dimple on her cheeks? Fra Pandolf. Everything is because of Fra Pandolf, and now he's going to say how. So, and we have just understood this part in between. For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance. Never read strangers like you that pictured countenance. So, there is no stranger like you who has seen this picture, right? And having seen this picture, considered or thought about the depth and passion of its earnest glance. Do you understand? The main part, the verb comes much later, it's inversed. So here he has taken poetic license, and in taking the poetic license, he has changed the grammar. So this is not normally how you speak. The grammar has been changed, and this is called poetic license. A poet can do this. He can change the grammar according to the poem. So strangers like you have always, when he says never read, he means that always strangers like you who have seen this particular painting, they have thought about the depth and passion of its earnest glance. How is there such a depth, such a passion in the earnest glance of the Duchess? And then to myself they turned. And because they did not know the answer to the question they had in their minds, they turned towards me, that is the Duke. Why did they turn towards me? Because now he says within a parenthesis. So anything that comes between brackets is called a parenthesis, and a parenthesis is meant to be complementary. It adds to whatever the content is. Says that since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. Now this you in this parenthesis is the Duchess. So he says that no one can touch the curtain that I have put on you except me, because I have all the right over you. I have the right to draw the curtain. I am the one. You see, this kind of a superiority is in the character of the Duke. So throughout the poem, when you listen to the Duke, you can actually figure out what kind of a character he has. So, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst. So it seemed as if the people would ask him the question if they durst, if they dared. Durst means dared. But did they dare to ask the question? No, they did not dare. How such a glance came there? So this is the question. How such a glance came there? How did the Duchess have such an amazing glance? What was she looking at that she had that smile? I mean, sometimes you see the smile on a girl's face and you say that what caused that smile to come? Mona Lisa, when you look at Mona Lisa, you don't even know whether she is smiling or not, but whatever it is, what was she looking at? So very similarly, what is the Duchess looking at? And she is very beautiful. So how such a glance came there? So not the first her husbands, so not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Now you see, this means that probably two ways to understand this. Probably the person listening to the Duke has asked this to the Duke and we did not come to know about it, or the Duke is imagining that he would ask it and instead he's just saying that I can see it in your face, you want to ask this question, so let me answer this question for you. That is how it is being spoken here. So, sir, not the first are you to turn and ask this question to me. You are not the first. There have been many others before you. So we have understand this entire portion that I said frappandolph by design for never read strangers like you, that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus, Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Now, the first thought that would go is probably she saw her husband and therefore she got so happy that she smiled. The Duke dismisses that in the first place. He says, it was not because of the husband, my presence. No. She was not smiling because I was there. That's the problem. You see, that is the problem why the Duchess is the last Duchess. So, she is not alive. Well, let's see where that goes. So, it was not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy. So, you see, the spot of joy means the smile. So, again, when he says, and I'll just erase this portion here so that I can talk about the spot of joy. We have discussed this before also. The spot of joy is the smile, right? It is a smile on the face of the Duchess, and using a roundabout way of saying a simple thing, this is called periphrasis. We have seen periphrasis in the poems by Tennyson as well. So, called the spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek, perhaps frappandolph's chance to say. Now, the Duke tries to answer the question that what exactly caused that smile to come on her face. So he says, perhaps frappandolph said these things. What are these things? Her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Or, paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. So you see, these are very poetic lines, and probably the painter, while painting, was speaking these lines to the Duchess, which was making her blush. So what is the meaning of these lines? First line. Firstly, what are the two things that they say first? The first thing that Frappandolph says is that her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. So the mantle is the shawl is covering too much, which is, according to Austin's, so Austin is a linguist, speech acts. So there are certain speeches, there are certain things that we say which are actually meant to have an action associated with it. So when someone comes into the classroom, there's a class going on, someone just says, "Sir, may I come in?" And he enters into the classroom. The sir just stops him midway and says, "The door is open." Well, the statement, "the door is open," is simple. It does not have anything unusual about it. You could just say, "Yes, the door is open." It's a fact, the door is open. But the student does not just stand there. The student goes and closes the door, because when the teacher said that the door is open, it was a speech, but it had an act associated with it. So it was a speech which involved some action. So when I say the door is open, it means close the door. Do not let it stay open. So it's an order said in the form of a statement. So just like that, when the when Frappandolph says that your shawl is covering too much of your arms, it is an indirect way of saying that why don't you let me see a little more of your body. So you see, this is something that would bring a blush on the cheeks of the Duchess. What is the second thing that he says? The second thing that he says is that paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. So he says that there is a half flush that dies along your throat. So there is a color, a half flushed color, which dies when it comes towards your throat. So there is a certain color gradient from her face to her throat. And the way I paint, the paints that I have, these paints can never reproduce that beautiful color that you have over there. So you see, flattery. So you see, in a way it is flirting. So paint is not good enough for you. So you, the lively lady, you are so beautiful that my painting cannot do justice to you. This is the kind of feeling that Fra Pandolf might have given to the Duchess, and therefore the Duchess was blushing. You see, this is the exact opposite treatment that the Duke gives to the Duchess. So according to the painter, in this sense, if we take Duke's words, because the Duke is suggesting, he might have said, we do not know what Fra Pandolf has said. So if we believe the Duke, then the Fra Pandolf is giving more importance to the person Duchess than the painting Duchess, whereas the Duke gives more importance to the painting Duchess than the person Duchess, right? So here is the difference. Such stuff was courtesy. So you see these things that Fra Pandolf is saying, this is all courtesy. Such stuff, and throughout you can see the enjambment happening. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. So according to the Duke, such words said by Fra Pandolf, they are reason enough. They are reason enough to call that spot of joy on her face. And that is why you see that amazing smile that she has. So this is where, the first part of the 4 parts ends, where he talks about the smile of the Duchess in the painting and the painting in general, and about what the Duke thinks about the painting. This is the first part. In the second part, in the next video, we'll be discussing the 3 parts. One is how does the Duke see the Duchess? So what is the character of the Duchess? The third part, in which it says that he cannot bow down to correct the Duchess as she is. And the last part, what is the point of saying this entire poem? So why this poem is being spoken in the first place? And we'll discuss all of that in the next video. People, I encourage you that if you have any doubts, you can ask them in the comments section, and I'll be happy to answer all of them. Till then, take care. See you in the next video.